It was the autumn of 1943, and the American daylight bombing campaign over Europe was dying. The concept was simple, brutal, and on the verge of collapse. Fly massive formations of B-17 flying fortresses deep into Germany, let their defensive guns protect each other, and pound the Nazi war machine into dust. But the Luftwaffe had written a different ending. German fighters would wait, patiently, just beyond the range of the American escorts. They'd watch the Little Republic P-47 Thunderbolts and Lockheed P-38 Lightnings, their fuel gauges dipping into the red, turn back for home. And then, the slaughter would begin. Without their fighter cover, the bomber boxes were like great, slow-moving herds of buffalo circled by packs of wolves. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s would slash through them with 20-millimeter cannons and machine guns. The skies over Schweinfurt, Regensburg, and Bremen were littered with aluminum and the contrails of falling fortresses. Loss rates of 10, 15, even 20% were unsustainable. A crewman's chance of surviving a 25-mission tour was statistically zero. In the officers' clubs of England, a grim joke began to circulate. The only thing ensuring the Flying Fortress lived up to its name was the sheer courage of the men inside. Something had to change. The 8th Air Force needed a miracle. And that miracle arrived in the most unlikely of forms. It wasn't a product of some grand, top-secret American design bureau. It was in fact born from a desperate, almost humiliating phone call from the British. In 1940, with their backs against the wall after Dunkirk, the Royal Air Force needed fighters, and they needed them fast. They came to the United States, looked at what was available, and found it lacking. So they asked North American Aviation if they could just build Curtiss P-40s under license. The president of North American, a man named Dutch Kindleberger, gave an answer that would change the war. He said, in so many words, we can build a better fighter than the P-40, and we can have it ready in less time. What his team, led by the brilliant designer Edgar Schmood, created was the NA-73X. It was sleek. It was beautiful. With its low-drag laminar flow wing and a gracefully sculpted fuselage, it looked like it was doing 400 miles an hour even sitting on the tarmac. The British loved it. They called it the Mustang. But there was a problem, a big one. Its engine, the Allison V1710, was a powerhouse at low altitude, but it choked, gasping for breath above 15,000 feet. It was a superb ground attack aircraft, a brilliant low-level reconnaissance plane, but in the high-altitude arena where the Luftwaffe lived and the bombers died, it was useless. So in 1943, as the bombers fell from the sky, the U.S. Army Air Forces had thousands of these beautiful, flawed fighters. They were the wrong plane, but they were about to meet the right idea.
The Mustang's airframe was a masterpiece, a thoroughbred trapped in the body of a cart horse by its mediocre engine. But a few sharp-eyed engineers on both sides of the Atlantic saw the potential. What if you gave this beautiful airframe a heart that could match its ambition? The answer was already powering the Spitfire and the Lancaster bomber, the Rolls-Royce Merlin. A liquid-cooled V-12 like the Allison, but with one critical difference: a two-stage, two-speed supercharger. This mechanical marvel forced dense air into the engine's cylinders, allowing it to sing its powerful song all the way up to 30,000 feet and beyond. It was a radical idea. Swapping a fighter's power plant is like performing a heart transplant on an athlete while they're running a marathon. But in Britain, they decided to try it. They took a Mustang airframe, designated AL-975, and carefully, painstakingly, fitted it with a Merlin 61 engine. The test pilot, Ronnie Harker, took it up for a flight on October 13, 1942. When he landed, his report was ecstatic. He said the transformed Mustang was, and I quote, a different aircraft altogether. It wasn't just good, it was sensational. It could climb, it could maneuver, and its speed at high altitude was breathtaking. Over 430 miles per hour, faster than anything the Germans had. The news crossed the Atlantic like an electric shock. North American Aviation immediately began designing their own version, integrating the Merlin into the airframe from the ground up. This wasn't just a modification, it was a rebirth. The P-51B and C were born. And with this new engine came a new problem, a beautiful problem: range. The Mustang's sleek, low-drag airframe was so efficient, it sipped fuel where other fighters guzzled it. Engineers looked at it and had a revelation. They took a standard 75-gallon fuel tank and, in a stroke of genius, stuck it right behind the pilot's seat, in the fuselage. This fuselage tank gave the Mustang incredible range, but it also made the aircraft unstable, a dangerous handful for a pilot on takeoff or in a dogfight. It was a flaw, a calculated risk, but it was a risk that meant this new fighter could fly all the way to Berlin and back. The stage was set. The weapon was forged. Now it needed to be unleashed. December 1943. The first P-51B Mustangs, their olive drab paint gleaming, began to arrive at bases across East Anglia. To the weary bomber crews, they were a curiosity, just another new fighter that would, they assumed, leave them alone to their fate halfway across Germany. But on their first long-range escort mission to Kiel, and then on the first major raid to Berlin in March 1944, something happened that changed the air war forever. The bomber crews gave their escorts a nickname, the Little Friends. And for the first time, those little friends were there, not just at the coast of France, not just over the Ruhr Valley, but all the way to the Big B, Berlin. The pilots of the 4th Fighter Group, many of them veterans of the Eagle squadrons with the RAF, couldn't believe the machine they were flying. Where the heavy P-47 had to dive on its enemies, the Mustang could meet them on their own terms. It could climb with a Messerschmitt 109. It could turn with a Focke-Wulf 190A, at least enough to get its guns on target. And its speed meant it could engage or disengage from a fight almost at will. One of those young pilots was a 22-year-old from San Diego named Don Gentile. Flying his P-51B, which he named Shangri-La, Gentile and his wingman, John Godfrey, became the Damon and Pythias of the 8th Air Force. They were hunters. They perfected the art of the kill, using the Mustang's speed and range to stalk their prey. The German pilots, accustomed to attacking the bombers at their leisure, were stunned. This wasn't the lumbering, diving Thunderbolt. This was a sleek, agile predator that was waiting for them at 30,000 feet. The Jagdflieger, the hunter pilots of the Luftwaffe, now found themselves being hunted. The psychological impact was immediate. A bomber crewman, Sergeant James L. Smith, put it simply: one day you look out and there's nothing but Focke-Wulfs and 109s. The next, you see these beautiful, slender fighters with the big bubble canopies sliding in next to you. And you know, for the first time, you might just live to see England again. The air war had been a battle. With the arrival of the Mustang, it became a siege.
The P-51 didn't just escort bombers. It became an instrument of annihilation. The strategy, championed by General Jimmy Doolittle, was radical and ruthless. He unleashed the Mustangs. No longer were they tied to the bomber boxes, forced to fly defensive, reactive patterns. His order was simple: go hunt the Luftwaffe. Destroy it in the air and on the ground. This was the beginning of the Big Week in February 1944. Thousands of bombers, protected by swarms of Mustangs, P-47s, and P-38s, hit German aircraft factories day after day. And when the Luftwaffe rose to defend them, the Mustangs were waiting. The skies over Germany became a shooting gallery. The Mustang's armament of 4.50 caliber machine guns, while less overwhelming than the P-47's 8, was more than enough. The guns were tightly grouped in the wings, creating a concentrated cone of fire that could saw a German fighter in half. But the Mustang's greatest weapon was its endurance. A P-51D with external drop tanks could stay in the air for over 6 hours. They would fly fighter sweeps ahead of the bombers, catching German fighters as they were still climbing, still forming up. They'd pounce on them as they took off and strafe them as they tried to land on shattered airfields. The statistics are staggering. Pilots like Francis Gabby Gabreski, George Preddy, and the legendary Aces in a Day shot down scores of German aircraft. The Mustang groups began racking up kill ratios of 10-1, even 20-1. The Luftwaffe was being bled white. Its experienced squadron leaders, the irreplaceable veterans of the Battle of Britain and the Eastern Front, were being systematically killed. They were being replaced with boys, teenagers with just a few dozen hours of flight time, sent up in increasingly inferior aircraft to face the battle-hardened American pilots in their near-perfect fighters. A captured German pilot, Oberlieutenant Franz Stigler, later confessed, "When we saw the Mustangs, we knew the war was lost. It wasn't just the plane, it was the confidence of the pilots. They owned the sky. We were just visitors." By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe was a ghost. Where were they? The answer was, they were gone. The Mustang, the plane that nobody wanted, had achieved what no other weapon could. It had cleared the sky. In the final year of the war, the ultimate variant arrived, the P-51D. With its magnificent teardrop bubble canopy, it gave the pilot unparalleled all-round vision. And with its 6.50 caliber machine guns, it was the final, perfect evolution of the breed. Pilots called it the Cadillac of the sky. It was fast, beautiful, and deadly. But the Mustang's legacy is more than just its kill count, which was over 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air. Its legacy is in the thousands of bomber crewmen who walked away from their aircraft at the end of the war, men who would have certainly died without their little friends flying high above them. It's a legacy written in the words of the men who flew against it. Adolf Galland, the commander of the German fighter arm, famously told Hermann Goering, "When I saw the Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." After the war, the Mustang served in Korea and in the air forces of dozens of nations, but its true immortality was secured in the world of air racing and as a beloved warbird. Even today, the sound of a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine is the sound of history, a throaty, powerful roar that echoes across air shows and stirs the soul. So how do we remember the P-51 Mustang? We remember it not as a perfect weapon, because it wasn't. It was vulnerable from behind. That fuselage tank made it tricky to fly. But we remember it as the right weapon at the most critical moment. It was the key that unlocked the door to victory in the air war over Europe. It was the beautiful solution to a bloody problem. A plane rejected by its own, reborn with a British heart that ultimately saved the lives of countless American boys. It's a story of ingenuity, of a brilliant design, and of the moment a beautiful machine became a war-winning weapon. The Mustang didn't just help win the war, it helped bring our boys home.